जय राधमाधवा कुंज बिहारी जय राधमाधवा कुंज बिहारी जय गोपीचन वल्लभा गिरिवरधारी जय गोपीचन वल्लभा गिरिवरधारी यशोदानंदन व्रज जनरंजन यशोदानंदन व्रज जनरंजन यमुना तीरा वनचारी यमुना तीरा वनचारी जय राधा माधव कुंज बिहारी जय राधा माधव कुंज बिहारी जय गोपीचन वल्लभा गिरिवरधारी जय गोपीचन वल्लभा गिरिवरधारी यशोदानंदन व्रज जनरंजन यशोदानंदन व्रज जनरंजन यमुना तीरा वनचारी यमुना तीरा वनचारी जय राधा माधव कुंज बिहारी जय राधा माधव कुंज बिहारी हरे कृष्ण 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 हरे 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 राम 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 हरे 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 कृष्ण 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 हरे 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 राम 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 हरे 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 कृष्ण 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 हरे 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 राम 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 हरे 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 कृष्ण 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 हरे 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 राम 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 हरे 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 कृष्ण 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 हरे 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 राम 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 हरे 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 कृष्ण 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 हरे 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 राम राम हरे 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 कृष्ण 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 हरे 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 राम राम हरे 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 कृष्ण 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 हरे 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 राम राम हरे 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 कृष्ण 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 हरे 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 राम राम हरे 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 कृष्ण 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 हरे 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 राम 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 हरे 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 कृष्ण 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 हरे 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 राम 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 हरे हरे जय प्रभुपदा जय प्रभुपदा श्रील प्रभुपदा जय प्रभुपदा जय प्रभुपदा श्रील प्रभुपदा जीवन विष्णुपाद मनमोहन चक्रवर्ती श्रुत श्रीमद स्वामी विशेष भक्तिवेदांत स्वामी श्रील प्रभुपाद की जय। ISKCON संस्थापक श्रील प्रभुपाद की जय। जयम विष्णुपाद परमहंस परिव्राजक स्तुत सदस्य श्रीमद् भक्ति सिद्धांत सरस्वती गोस्वामी महाराज प्रभुपाद की जय। जयम विष्णुपाद लकुर किशोरदास पाद महाराज की जय। जयम विष्णुपाद सच्चिदानंद श्रील भक्ति विनोद ठाकुर की जय। जयम विष्णुपाद वैष्णव साधु श्री जगन्नाथ दास महाराज की जय। जय श्री रूप सनातन भट्ट रघुनाथ श्री जीव गोपाल भट्टदास अविनाश गोस्वामी प्रभु की जय। नमाचार्य दास ठाकुर की जय। प्रेम से कोई श्री कृष्ण चैतन्य प्रभु नित्यानंद श्री अद्वैत दादरा शिव शांति गौरव भक्तवृंद की जय। श्री श्री राधा कृष्ण गोकुल श्याम कुंड राधा कुंड गिरिवर्धन की जय। श्री श्री गौरांगी बेंगलुरीश्वर भगवान की जय। श्री मायापुर धाम की जय। श्री वृंदावन धाम की जय। गंगा माई की जय। यमुना माई की जय। भक्ति देवी की जय। तुलसी देवी की जय। अनंत कोटि वैष्णव की जय। श्री हरिनाम संकीर्तन की जय। ग्रंथराज श्रीमद् भागवतम की जय। इस्कॉन गुरुवंद की जय। समावेद भक्तवृंद की जय। गौर प्रेमानंद all glories to the assembly, all glories to the assembly, all glories to the assembly, all glories to Shri and Shri Gauranga, all glories to Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya, Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya, Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya, Narayanam Namaskritya Naram Chaiva Narottamam, Divim Saraswati Vyasam Tato Jayamudire, Nashtaprayeshu Apatreshu Nityam Bhagavata Sevaya, भगवती उत्तम श्लोके भक्तिर्भवति नैष्ठिकी मोहन करोति वाचालं पंगं लंघयति गिरिं पदमहं वन्दे श्रीगुरुं देवतानं परमानन्दं श्री चैतन्य ईश्वर। Hare Krishna. Welcome you all to today Saturday morning Srimad Bhagavatam class. We are today having a summary study discussion on Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 3, Chapter 5. Text 1 to text 25 or maybe even 26 if time permits. So we see in the previous chapter as to how Uddhava, before the Lord wound up his pastimes, Uddhava was a very great devotee of the Lord and also an associate of the Lord. So the Lord left instructions for him to go to Badrikashrama. And he also said that he would be meeting Maitreya Rishi, and he also left instructions for Vidura to take spiritual instructions from Maitreya Rishi. So after that, the Lord wound up his pastimes, and on way to Badrikashrama, Uddhava met Vidura, and he told him to take instructions from Maitreya Rishi as per the Lord's instructions. So we see here in the chapter, 5th chapter, as to how Vidura very tactfully asked questions on spiritual matters, but generally, as we see now here, Vidura is a great devotee of the Lord. He had the opportunity to host the Lord in his house. And in fact, the Lord refused to dine at Duryodhana's house when Duryodhana had invited. Now here, that shows how great Vidura was as a devotee of the Lord. Also, Maitreya Rishi also was a great devotee of the Lord. And both of them are meeting at a very holy place called Haridwar. So everything is perfect in terms of the speaker, in terms of the hearer, the place, everything. So we'll start with text number 1, in which Shukadeva Goswami is telling. So Shukadeva Goswami says, Vidura, the best among the Kuru dynasty, who was perfect in devotional service to the Lord, thus reached the source of the celestial Ganges river, Haridwar, where Maitreya, the great fathomless learned sage of the world, was seated. Vidura, who was perfect in gentleness and satisfied in transcendence, inquired from him. So Maitreya Rishi was also expecting Vidura to meet him. And this place was a sacred place in Haridwar, where the Ganges river flows. So Haridwar means it's a door to Hari, that is the spiritual world. So that is the meaning, a real literal meaning of Haridwar. Vidura was also a great devotee of the Lord. He was perfect in devotional service to the Lord. And Maitreya Rishi was also a very, very learned personality who got instructions of Srimad Bhagavatam from the Lord himself. So Vidura had a lot of opportunity to serve the Lord personally, but Still, the Lord gave instructions for him to take instructions from Maitreyi. That shows that one should accept a spiritual master and take guidance from him for progression and perfection in spiritual life. And Vidura was also very gentle in his character, and always he was satisfied in transcendence, means was very blissful, being situated in transcendental devotional service. So, Vidura, it is mentioned in this loka as Achyuta Bhava Siddha, or perfection by dint of devotional service. There are two types of living entities. One is Chuta and the other is Achyuta. Conditioned living entities like us, we are all called Chuta because there is a tendency for us to fall down. Whereas Vidura was an Achyuta, they are infallible. So Vidura was situated, being always situated in devotion service to the Lord, reached a perfect stage of life, which is called Achyuta Bhava Siddha, or rather, he achieved perfection by dint of devotional service to the Supreme Lord. This is one point. And Vidura approached Maitreyi for specific purpose, for inquiry into the subject matters of Srimad Bhagavatam. Okay. So now we will go to the second sloka, where Vidura meets Maitreyi, and Vidura asks, Vidura said, "O great sage, everyone in this world engages in fruitive activities to attain happiness, but one finds neither satiation nor the mitigation of distress. On the contrary, one is only aggravated by such activities. Please therefore give us directions on how one should live for real happiness." So Vidura asks basically a question on how one should achieve or one should live to get real happiness. As you all know, we are all striving for only one thing, that is happiness in this material world. But this material world is itself created in such a way that one cannot attain happiness. The Lord himself says, Dukkhalayam Asashvatam. So this place is a place of distress, designed for distress, in which there is no question of one attaining happiness. But still, conditioned living entities, they are engrossed so much in material activities, which they feel is the ultimate goal of life, by which they can attain this happiness. But here in this loka, we find that Vidura says that living entities are looking for perfection or satiation in happiness. That means satiation means is a stage where one has actually achieved the limit, but one does not attain the satiation in happiness. But on the other hand, the distress is also not mitigated. There are two things. One is happiness and the other one is distress. But here he says that neither of them things are achieved. Not does the living entity attain happiness, nor the distress is mitigated from their life. But instead, he is mentioning that the conditioned souls are getting intense distress. That means actually, instead of the happiness decreasing from our life, the distress that once gets into his life is very much increasing. So that distress is also increasing instead of the happiness, one getting the happiness. So Vidura is drawing the attention of the living entities, asking for material happiness, because he knows the conditioned living entities are after material happiness, not the spiritual bliss that one should be getting into. So he is drawing the attention of conditioned souls somehow or other, so that they are drawn to this aspect of happiness, and gradually he moves on to the subject of transcendental matters. So he says that the whole material world is such that one becomes more and more entangled in the network of actions and reactions. Actions and reactions. Fruitive activity means action, and when action means some sinful activity will always be there, and for every action there is an equal and opposite reaction. So there is no solution to the problem of life. So Vidura is asking the directions for real happiness. Then in the third sloka, Vidura says, "Oh my Lord, great philanthropic souls travel on the earth on behalf of the Supreme Personality of Godhead to show compassion to the fallen souls who are averse to the sense of subordination to the Lord. So, great philanthropic souls. So here, this refers to pure devotees of the Lord, and they travel on the earth throughout, not for pilgrimage like what we may travel, but they go on behalf of the Supreme Personality of Godhead to show compassion to the fallen souls. So generally, the whole, if you see, most of the population come under to the fallen souls. And for what? He says they are averse to the sense of subordination to the Lord. Everyone wants to lord over the material nature. Everyone wants to lord over everyone and everything. But no one wants to uh, be a subordinate, to take to the subordination of the Lord, which is the actual original constitutional position of the living entities. Living entities, being part and parcel of the Lord, are meant to serve the Lord, and that is what is subordination to the Lord. Rather, take to the orders of the or the instructions of the Lord, not to uh, exploit material nature or dominate the material nature or everything that is possible. So Vidura is actually asking that how these conditioned souls can be delivered. So they travel to show compassion to the fallen souls. Now, why? Because the conditioned souls have turned their face away from the Lord due to the illusory energy called Maya, and they get carried away. So one gets carried away by this Maya, which is also an energy of the Lord, and in the process, they tend to commit sinful activities and reactions take place. And when reactions take place, the living entities are further entangled and result in sudukitasya, which is mentioned this word sudukitasya. Sudukitasya means intense distress. So instead of distress being mitigated, the living entities get entangled in intense distress. Rather, in the process of trying to commit fruitive activities, the living entities end up resulting in intense distress. For example, somebody, then one thing that we see that now very commonly that people rush to foreign countries like US and Europe and all, and they go to achieve a higher purpose of having a lot of money and a luxurious life, living conditions, etc. But somehow, if you see, many of them end up the opposite, getting entangled into the fruitive activities, and the result is also distress. Many times people forget and they end up losing their life either due to accident, this, that. So many things are there. Or see, the next generation, the children taking up the wrong path. So the purpose of life is not achieved, but rather one gets into intense distress in the process of achieving perfection. So great souls like Vidura, they travel across the globe to deliver conditioned souls like us for out of compassion for them. So Sukadeva Goswami, other examples given are like Sukadeva Goswami. He also traveled to give Srimad Bhagavatam to Parikshit Maharaj. And this example of Maitreya giving and Vidura, Maitreya giving Srimad Bhagavatam to Vidura. So Maitreya Rishi also was traveling and Vidura was also traveling. Now, these great souls like Vidura Maitreya, they are not conditioned living entities like us, but rather by example, they show the role of preachers and one who has to take the process of hearing first, and with the guys under the guidance of a bona fide spiritual master for perfection in spiritual life. So in this process, the important is the instructions of the Supreme Lord, and at the same time, both of them are very, very dear to the Lord. Both Vidura as well as Maitreya were dear to the Lord. Now, if we see in the case of Vidura itself, Vidura gave a lot of guidance to Dhritarashtra. But in the process of giving proper guidance to Dhritarashtra, Duryodhan got upset and he asked Vidura to leave. So Vidura left the palace and he traveled to all the holy places of pilgrimage. Now, after the Mahabharata war was over and Dhritarashtra lost all his sons, Vidura came back. Vidura, what for he came back? He came back to give guidance to Dhritarashtra. And he, in fact, in the Srimad Bhagavatam, it is mentioned that how Vidura was a true friend of Dhritarashtra, and he came back and counseled Dhritarashtra, saying that he was staying in the palace as a pet dog after losing everything. So Dhritarashtra lost everything, but still he was staying in the palace with the Pandavas like a pet dog. So the Vidura actually used a very crucial term like a pet dog. And he says finally, when Dhritarashtra realized, he along with Dhritarashtra and his wife Gandhari, they left without informing anyone, and they went into the forest and gave up the body. Now the important point is Vidura gave the same message to Dhritarashtra before, but it was not taken in the right spirit by Dhritarashtra because of his association with Duryodhana. Now that Duryodhana was lost, the same message was effective because that association of Duryodhana was lost by Dhritarashtra. So association is very, very important in one's life. This example shows that many times we might see that we may advise someone to take up the path of spiritual life to show them the real path of perfection. But we might see they might be engrossed in fruitive activities so much that they may not show any interest because they have got other associations also or other agenda behind them. So such people, we may not be able to force them. But the law of nature is that they will automatically things will turn upside down, and this is what happened to Dhritarashtra. And then finally, when he lost the materialistic association, then Dhritarashtra heeded to the advice of Vidura, and then finally they wound up their pastimes. So Vidura was a true friend of Dhritarashtra, but Dhritarashtra had failed to recognize that compassionate nature of Vidura. So Krishna also instructs in Bhagavad Gita in chapter in Bhagavad Gita 1868. He says, "For one who explains this supreme secret to the devotees, pure devotional service is guaranteed, and at the end he will come back to me." Though Vidura was a great pure devotee of the Lord, but this is an instruction to all of us that we must also reveal the secret of Bhagavad Gita and Srimad Bhagavatam, uh, and when we discuss or when we preach the glories of the Lord, pure devotional service is guaranteed. And at the end, Krishna says that he will come back to me. Similar instructions were given by Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu to Kurma Brahmana during his tour of South India, where Chaitanya Mahaprabhu tells Kurma Brahmana, Yare Deka Tareka Krishna Upadesha. Instruct everyone to follow the orders of Lord Krishna as they are given in Bhagavad Gita and Srimad Bhagavatam. So he says that everyone should follow the orders of Krishna as they are given in Bhagavad Gita and Srimad Bhagavatam. Then he says, in this way, become a spiritual master and try to liberate everyone in this land. So everyone can become a spiritual master and should become and try to liberate the other conditioned souls in this land. So devotees are all very, very compassionate to all the living entities. And here, Vidura's example is a perfect compassion for all the classes of devotees that are mentioned. Then text number 4. So then he says, Vidura addresses Maitreya, therefore, O great sage, please give me instruction on the transcendental devotional service of the Lord, so that he who is situated in the heart of everyone can be pleased to impart from within knowledge of the absolute truth in terms of the ancient Vedic principles delivered only to those who are purified by the process of devotional service. I'll repeat this because many important points. He says, give me instruction on the transcendental devotional service of the Lord. So Vidura, though he is a great devotee of the Lord, he is asking Maitreya Rishi to give further instructions on transcendental devotional service of the Lord. This is how the devotees of the Lord are. They don't think that they have become great devotees, but they ask further instructions on the progress in devotional service. Then he says, so that he who is situated in the heart of everyone can be pleased to impart. That means the Lord is situated in the heart of everyone as Paramatma. And when very humbly, in the right proper mood and spirit, takes instructions, or rather asks instructions on devotions from the service from the spiritual master, then that Lord who is situated in everyone's heart as Paramatma becomes pleased to impart the instructions from within. What he gives, the knowledge of the absolute truth in terms of the ancient principles, Vedic principles, delivered only to those who are purified by the process of devotional service. That means devotees are purified, but still, devotees like Vidura are seeking instructions so that the Lord, seated as Paramatma, may be pleased with the mood of asking. That's why the Lord also says one must accept the spiritual master, surrender, inquire, and render service. These are three important instructions given in the Bhagavad Gita. When one inquires, then the Lord, being pleased as Paramatma, he imparts knowledge as per the Vedic principles. What knowledge the Lord gives? Knowledge of the absolute truth. And these are delivered to those who are purified by the process of devotion service. It means unless and until one has got, if one has got a mixture of devotion service and results of fruitive activities, mental speculation, or dhyana yoga, like meditation on the Lord and Paramatma, it is all mixed, not pure devotional service. So one has to become purified by taking up the process of devotional service, for which Srila Prabhupada in this particular sloka also gives a reference from Bhagavad Gita, chapter 10, text 10, Tesham satati yuktaram bhajatam priti purvakam. Only when the Lord is satisfied with the devotional service of the devotee does he impart knowledge as he did for Arjuna and Uddhava. The yogis, the jnanis, yogis and karmis cannot expect this direct cooperation of the Lord, which is what I mentioned, because they are not able to satisfy the Lord by transcendental loving service, nor do they believe in such service to the Lord. That means all these three classes, that means karmis, jnanis, and yogis, they don't believe in rendering service to the Lord, so that they cannot get direct cooperation from the Lord. So when one takes up to the process of devotional service, one gets purified. And then as one gets purified, and then the Lord, being pleased with the devotional service of the devotee, he imparts this transcendental knowledge to the devotee. So devotional service is appreciated by one who is purified in his heart completely from karma, jnana, and dhyana. The Lord is transcendental. The Lord is transcendental nature. Devotional service is also transcendental. The process is done transcendental, and the goal is also transcendental, and it is spiritual. The Lord is realized in three phases, that is Brahman, Paramatma, and Bhagavan. Karmis try to give the fruitive results to the Lord. Jnanis, they try to merge into the impersonal Brahma Jyoti. And the yogis try to meditate on the Bhagavan, the Paramatma feature of the Lord. But none of them are rather pure devotional service. So the bhakti process or the devotional service performed under regulative principles of Vaidhi Bhakti. We are all performing Vaidhi Bhakti, that is devotional service, following the prescribed rules and regulations as given in the revealed scriptures. And when one practices this very seriously and sincerely, it gives an opportunity for a neophyte devotee to rise to the stage of Raga Bhakti, in which the Lord responds from within as Chaitya Guru or Paramatma, or the spiritual master as super consciousness. So we have individual consciousness within us. Our consciousness can be perceived by us by the movements in our body, by consciousness in our body. Whereas the Supreme Lord is super consciousness, which is mentioned in this verse. There is another very nice quote in Srimad Bhagavatam, in the 4th canto of Srimad Bhagavatam, where Prithu Maharaj was asked to take benediction by the Lord. Prithu Maharaj performed a lot of sacrifices. And when the Lord was pleased by him, the Lord appeared and Prithu Maharaj asked for a benediction. He said, "My dear Lord, I do not wish to have a benediction of merging into your existence, a benediction in which there is no existence of nectarian beverage of your lotus feet. I want the benediction of at least 1,000,000 years. For this, I may be able to hear about the glories of your lotus feet from the mouths of pure devotees." So Prithu Maharaj is asking for a benediction that he doesn't want to merge into the impersonal Brahma Jyoti, or into the merging into the Brahma Jyoti existence. But he is asking for a benediction in which there is no existence of, I mean, he does not want to have any benediction where there is no existence of the beverage of the nectarian lotus feet of the Lord. He is asking for a benediction that at least he wants 1,000,000 years for this, because that will enable to hear about the glories of the Lord's lotus feet from the mouths of pure devotees. So Maitreya was also a pure devotee of the Lord. Vidura was also a pure devotee of the Lord. And he was very, very anxious or eager, intense eagerness, that is what Sri Rupa Goswami says, lolium, or intense greed to hear about the glories of the Supreme Lord. Then behold text number 5, where Vidura says, "O great sage, kindly narrate how the Supreme Personality of Godhead, who is independent, desireless Lord of the three worlds and the controller of all energies, accepts incarnations and creates the cosmic manifestation with perfectly arranged regulative principles for its maintenance." So he is asking to narrate about the Supreme Lord who is independent. One of the names for the Lord is Swarat. He is independent. And he says, who is independent, desireless Lord of the three worlds and the controller of all the energies. The Lord is the controller of all the energies that are there. Also, he's asking about the personality who accepts incarnations and creates this cosmic manifestation with perfectly regulative principles for its maintenance. The Lord not only created this material world, but also he also created regulative principles for its maintenance. So here in specific, Vidura is asking about the Purusha avatars as the living entities are more eager to know about the creation, maintenance of the universe. I mean, normally conditioned living entities, what happens? They are interested in so many things. What they are interested, they want to know how the creation has taken place, whether it was Big Bang theory or any other theory, or who else has been the cause of creation, how the universe is maintained. So Vidura is indirectly, gradually he started how to attain happiness. Then he is going into the path, how the material universe has been created, how it is being maintained. So he is in fact asking about the three Purusha avatars, which are Karanodakasaya Vishnu, Garbhodakasaya Vishnu, and Kshirodakasaya Vishnu. So when a living entity takes birth in this material world, his sustenance is already arranged, and all the forms and of all the forms of life, the human beings are the most valuable. Why? Because human beings have got a goal, can understand the goal of life. But on the contrary, we find that human beings are more concerned about other things like creation, etc. Why? Because here Prabhupada mentioned the purport that they are concerned more about the population explosion, etc. But animals don't express concern about population explosion. Why? Because eating, meeting, defending, and sleeping. There is no starvation, Srila Prabhupada mentions, of anything in this material world. When they are created, their maintenance is also assured. The only starvation that is there in this material world is starvation for Krishna consciousness. That is what is lacking. Then he goes on to the next text number 6. He says, he lies down on his own heart, spread in the form of the sky, and thus placing the whole creation in that space, he expands himself into many living entities which are manifested as different species of life. He does not have to endeavor for his maintenance because he is the master of all mystic powers and the proprietor of everything. Thus, he is distinct from the living entities. So the Lord expands in the form of many living entities which are manifested in different species of life. So there are 8,400,000, 84 lakh species of life. The living entities take one of these forms of life. Now, we try to struggle for our maintenance, which is also given assurance by the Lord. But the Lord does not have to endeavor for his maintenance because everything belongs to him. He is complete in everything. He is not desirous of anything because he is the master of all mystic powers. The Lord can create anything he wants and as much as he wants. And he is the proprietor of everything. Thus, this is the distinction between the Lord and the living entities. The living entities actually, the spirit that is there, the spirit soul in our body is a superior energy, and the matter, that body is made out of dull matter, which is called the inferior energy. And it is the combination of these two energies that bring up the manifestation of this material world. So the Lord is full in everything, in all his opulence, and does not strive for anything. But the living entities aspire for power and pleasure for this material world. We all aspire to have some power so that we can control this material world. And also, out of our desire to achieve some power, we also try to get some pleasure out of it. So these are two things that all living entities are aspiring for, but they don't get it. Rather, they end up in suffering, because the suffering is due to the want of Krishna. They don't want Krishna. The next sloka. Then Vidura says, you may narrate also about the auspicious characteristics of the Lord in his different incarnations for the welfare of the twice born, the cows, and the demigods. Our minds are never satisfied completely, although we continuously hear of his transcendental activity. So, how very nicely Vidura is explaining that although our minds are we always continuously hear of the transcendental activities of the Lord, still our minds are never satisfied completely. So this is the nature of a pure devotee of the Lord, that although he may be hearing, he is not completely satisfied, which is actually called satiated. See, the Prabhupada uses the word satiated. That is, one never becomes fully satisfied, even though he hears about the transcendental activities of the Lord. So Vidura is asking this verse to narrate about the characteristics of the Lord in his different incarnations for the welfare of the twice born, the cows, and the demigods. So the Lord accepts various incarnations for delivering the twice born, the cows, and the demigods. Why? Because in the Chaitanya Charitamrita also, there is a very nice quote where the Lord says, Namo Brahman, it says, Namo Brahmani Devago, Brahmanita, it says, Jagatita, Krishna, Govinda, and Namo Nama. Let me offer my respectful obeisance unto Lord Krishna, who is the worshipable deity for all Brahminical men, who is the well-wisher of cows and the Brahmanas, and who is always benefiting the whole world. I offer my repeated obeisances unto the personality of Godhead, known as Krishna and Govinda. So this is an instruction that was given by Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu to Kurma Brahmana in his sorry, not to the Kurma Brahmana, but this was given by the Lord himself during his pastimes. So the Lord appears in his various incarnations to deliver the fallen living entities. So human being is normally born by union of a father and mother, but a real civilized human being is one who has taken his birth by contact with his spiritual master, who becomes the actual father. So material father and mother may be different in different words, but spiritual master is only one, who is the representative of the Supreme Lord. And he is the eternal father, because spiritual master has the responsibility. What is the responsibility? To lead the disciple to spiritual elevation or to the ultimate goal of life. Now, Srila Prabhupada also mentions about how human being has got an inclination to hear narrations and stories, and that is why so many books, magazines, and novels, and so many newspapers are available in the market. Why? Because there is a tendency, there is an eagerness or an inclination for all the living entities to have hearing. But the beauty of the transcendental literature like Bhagavad Gita and Srimad Bhagavatam is that they never become old, but rather the other mundane magazines, etc., one becomes frustrated over a period of time by hearing the same thing again and again, because it is only dirt. Whatever magazines or novels they describe, they're all nonsense. So a point comes when one becomes frustrated hearing all those things. But Srimad Bhagavatam and Bhagavad Gita never become old. Vidura heard the pastimes of the Lord many times, but he was never satiated. Similar example is given that how Chaitanya Mahaprabhu heard the pastimes of Dhruva Maharaj and Prahlad Maharaj hundreds of times from Gadadhara Pandit, who was also a great devotee of the Lord, of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu himself. So Mahaprabhu showed that even though he heard hundreds of times the pastimes of Dhruva Maharaj and Prahlad Maharaj, still he was hearing from Gadadhara Pandita. The next verse number 8, he then addresses the Supreme King of all kings has created different planets and places of habitation where living entities are situated in terms of the modes of work, modes of nature and work, and he has created their different kings and rulers. So here you see how Vidura is gradually getting deeper and deeper. Here he says the Supreme King of all kings. Who is the Supreme King? Lord Krishna has created different planets and places of habitation where living entities are situated in terms of the modes of nature and work. And he has created their different kings and rulers. So the Lord has created many different planets in every universe. And in each and every planet, there are different types of species that are manifested in these places. For example is given by Srila Prabhupada, like deserts, islands, and valleys. There are different forms, kinds of men who live in all these places. People in the deserts are different from those who are living in the mountains. So similarly, there are also different planets, and right from the topmost planet to the lowest planet, Patala, there are living entities in every place. And not only that, all of them are placed in these different planets based on their past deeds and swabhava and karma, based on their activities and based on the three modes of material nature according to the past deeds. Everyone is situated in the mode of one mode of material nature, either goodness, passion, or ignorance, or a combination of all of them. And each and every planet has a ruler, and Krishna is the chief of all the kings and the rulers. Then we go to text number 9. So in text number 9, Vidura tells Maitreya, O chief amongst the Brahmanas, please also describe how Narayana, the creator of the universe and the self-sufficient Lord, has differently created natures, activities, forms, features, and names of the different living creatures. So here he's asking as to how Lord Narayana has created this universe. The Lord is self-sufficient, but still he has created this universe and has created the nature. The nature for each and every place is different. He has also created the activities. He has created the place for activities for each and everyone. Then he has created forms, and he has also created features and names for different living entities. There are so many different living entities, and each one is different from one another. Srila Prabhupada mentions about difference like black complexion, white complexion. So many differences are that people identify themselves as white, some identify themselves as black. But what happens, what is all this due to? Srila Prabhupada mentioned that pious acts lead one to take birth in a good and highly placed family, to become rich, to become learned, and to acquire beautiful bodily features, whereas impious acts lead one to become poor by parentage, to be always in want, to become a fool or illiterate, and to acquire ugly bodily features. So we see here that when one performs pious activities, he gets birth in a good and highly placed Brahminical family, or he becomes rich, or he becomes very learned, or he may get beautiful bodily features, or he might get a combination of any of these. But by doing impious acts, one has to be poor in parentage. He has to take birth in a poor family, or he will be always in want. His desires don't get satisfied ever. Or he becomes a fool, or he's illiterate, and he acquires ugly bodily features. So this is how one achieves various forms of life in various planets, uh, in different species of life. So Vidura is requesting Maitreya to explain these differences between all the living creatures made by Narayana, the Supreme Personality of Godhead. So Vidura is asking these questions to Maitreya Rishi due to the living entity's tendency to inquire on these subject matters. That means an intelligent person is one who inquires why am I born like this? Why I am suffering like this? Or why am I not suffering? This is the intelligence that is required, and Vidura is showing by example by asking questions on these subjects. So we see so far how Vidura is very gradually started discussing on topics of common interest to the common man, and gradually he is going to the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Please describe how the Lord accepts incarnations, how the Lord places these living entities, etc. Now we'll go to the next verse, verse number 10. He says, "Oh my Lord, I have repeatedly heard about these higher and lower statuses of human society from the mouth of Vyasadeva, and I have had enough of all these lesser subject matters and their happiness. They have not satisfied me with the nectar of topics about Krishna." So here Vidura says that I have heard about in, enough about the higher and lower status of human society from the mouth of Vyasadeva. So Vidura was the son of Vyasadeva, and he has heard from Vyasadeva enough about the higher and lower status of life. But he says he has also heard enough of the lesser subject matters and their happinesses, but they have not satisfied me with the nectar of topics like topics of Krishna. So Vidura has heard all these things, and still he is not satisfied. He wants to completely hear and hear and hear. So the point is that Krishna Katha, a common man is generally not interested in Krishna Katha, but rather interested in history, social science, philosophy, etc. So Srila Vyasadeva has compiled many books such as Puranas and Mahabharata, and all these readings are subject matter for the mass of people, and they were compiled with a view to reviving their conscious God consciousness and now forgotten the conditioned life of existence. So he says that the real purpose of literatures, such literature, is not to such present topics of historical references, but to revive people's sense of God consciousness. So Vyasadeva compiled Puranas, Mahabharata, etc., to revive their original God consciousness. Now, if you see, one important point in Mahabharata is Mahabharata has got so many things, politics, economics, so many things are involved in Mahabharata. But in the middle of Mahabharata is Bhagavad Gita. So when one takes interest in other subject matters, gradually he comes to the point of reading Bhagavad Gita and understanding it also. So Vyasadeva was very cleverly put Bhagavad Gita in the middle of Mahabharata, so that people, though they may take interest in other subject matters, might be gradually drawn towards understanding Bhagavad Gita also. So Vidura explained the position of mundane knowledge and also transcendental knowledge of Sri Krishna. So example is given, as fire is never satisfied in this consumption of firewood, so a pure devotee of the Lord never hears enough about Krishna's history. That means when in a fire, if you put firewood, that fire is never satisfied. Similarly, a devotee of the Lord is never fully satisfied, even though he may be hearing about Krishna. Then he says that historical events and other narrations concerning social and political incidents all become transcendental as soon as they are in relationship with Krishna. So many subject matters are there, but as soon as they are connected to Krishna, they all become transcendental. So there are two types of Krishna Katha. One is spoken by the Lord himself in the form of Bhagavad Gita, and other one is Srimad Bhagavatam, which is about the pastimes of the Lord. Then we go to text number 11. Then Vidura says, one in who in human society, that means who in human society can be satisfied without hearing sufficient talk of the Lord, whose lotus feet are the sum total of all the places of pilgrimage, and who is worshipped by great sages and devotees. Such topics can cut off one's bondage to family affection simply by entering the holes of one's ears. So Vidura is telling that who is that person in this human society who will be completely satisfied without hearing enough of the Lord. That means whatever you hear of the Lord, one can still be not satisfied, and whose lotus feet are the sum total of all the places of pilgrimage, and who is worshipped by great sages and devotees. So the lotus feet of the Lord are the sum total of all the places of pilgrimage, and The same Supreme Lord is worshipped by great sages and devotees. And what happens when one hears about these topics of the Lord? Such topics can cut off one's bondage to family affection simply by entering the holes of one's ears. That means when one hears Krishna Katha, it is so powerful that by once hearing it with rapt attention, one's bondage to all the family affection is automatically cut off. So the Lord's lotus feet, another important point is that the Lord's two lotus feet are the sum total of all the places of pilgrimage. In fact, there's a nice quote in this canto itself, 3.541, where it says, "The lotus feet of the Lord are by themselves the shelter of all the places of pilgrimage. The clear-minded sages, carried by the wings of the Vedas, always search after the nest of your lotus-like face. Some of them surrender to your lotus feet, and every step by taking shelter of the best of the rivers, the Ganges, which can deliver one from all sinful reactions." That means the two lotus feet of the Lord are the shelter of all the pilgrimage places of pilgrimage. That means all the places of pilgrimage are present in the Lord's lotus feet. So when one surrenders unto the lotus feet of the Lord, one can be delivered from all the sinful reactions. So this family affection that is mentioned is actually due to the manifestation of the external energy or Maya. So under one's this illusion energy, one identifies himself as a body, then his extended body as his family, still further extension, the society, then nation, etc. So as long as one is absorbed in these bodily conditions, one has to undergo the repetition of birth and death in this material world. So there are two benefits one attains by hearing Krishna Katha. One develops a deep-rooted satisfaction for hearing, and the other is automatically one develops detachment from family life. One does not have to artificially try to develop detachment, but by hearing intensely Krishna Katha, one becomes detached. Then in text number 12, Vidura says, "Your friend, the great sage Krishna Dvaipayana Vyasa, has already described the transcendent qualities of the Lord in his great work, the Mahabharata. But the whole idea is to draw the attention of the mass of people to Krishna Katha, that is Bhagavad Gita, through their strong affinity for hearing mundane topics." So here, Vidura is again stressing that Vyasadeva has already described the transcendent qualities of the Lord in his great work, Mahabharata. But what is the purpose? To draw the attention of the mass of people to Krishna Katha. That is, in bracket, Srila Prabhupada mentioned Bhagavad Gita, through the strong affinity for hearing mundane topics. So we all have a strong hearing affinity. We all have a strong desire to hear mundane topics. But through this, with Vyasadeva is drawing our attention to Krishna Katha through examples like Mahabharata, and ultimately reach to Bhagavad Gita. So Vyasadeva compiled these types of literatures for the less intelligent personalities like Stri Shudra and Dvijabandhu, who by reading Mahabharata can gradually develop a taste in Krishna Katha. Then in the next text, we go on to text number 13, where Vidura is addressing, "For one who is anxious to engage constantly in hearing such topics, Krishna Katha gradually increases his indifference towards all other things. Such constant remembrance of the Lord's lotus feet of Lord Krishna by the devotee who has achieved transcendental bliss vanquishes all his miseries without delay." I'll repeat this again because it's very important. For one who is anxious to constantly hear topics of Krishna Katha, what happens? It gradually increases his indifference towards all other things. So by hearing Krishna Katha, one automatically develops indifference to hearing about other things. And such constant remembrance of the lotus feet of Lord by the devotee who has achieved transcendental bliss and vanquishes all his miseries without delay. So if you remember, in the beginning we discussed about achieving happiness and mitigating distress. But here, Vidura is asking, how by hearing Krishna Katha and by remembering the lotus feet of the Lord, one can actually vanquish all his miseries and thereby get transcendental bliss. This bliss is higher than the material happiness. Material happiness has got a satiation, but the bliss that one gets by spiritual desire for spiritual development, by being perfection in spiritual activities, reaches a stage of bliss which is compared much more than comparatively much more than happiness. So Krishna, being absolute, Krishna and his pastimes, his qualities, Krishna Katha, they are all same. They have the same potency. So Bhagavad Gita being spoken by the Lord is as good as the Lord himself. So when a sincere devotee reads Bhagavad Gita, it is as good as seeing the Lord face to face in his personal presence. So absorption in the sound and anxiousness to hear brings detachment. So when we absorb in the Krishna Katha and when we develop anxiousness to hear, then automatically it brings detachment. And also what happens is that when we hear Krishna, remember Krishna, it brings joy and extinguishes all material miseries. Then we go to text number 14. I'll rush through a little bit because some more words are left out. Then the next question, this thing, Vidura is asking Maitreya, oh sage, persons who because of their sensual activities are averse to the topics of transcendence and thus ignorant of the purpose of Mahabharata or Bhagavad Gita are pitied by the pitiable. I also pity them because I see how their duration of life is spoiled by eternal time while they involve themselves in presentations of philosophical speculation, theoretical ultimate goals of life, and different modes of ritual. So here, Vidura is telling Maitreya, he says persons who, because of their sinful activities, are averse to the topics of transcendence. So even though the Lord has Vyasadeva has compiled literatures like Mahabharata, Puranas, etc., still people are averse to hearing these topics because of their sinful activities. So when one performs sinful activities, then they develop a sort of averseness to hearing the topics of the Lord. Then Vidura says, I also pity them because I see their duration of life being spoiled by eternal time while they involve themselves in presentations of philosophical speculation, theoretical ultimate goal of life, and 3 different modes of ritual. So generally what people are tending to, they want to see the philosophical presentations of philosophical speculation. There's so many philosophical speculators who give so many theories, but people want to hear these various theories. Theoretical ultimate goal of life. So many things people might have developed different goals of life and ultimately different modes of ritual. People are addicted to rituals and in the process being absorbed in these rituals. What happens when one has desire? One tends to perform sinful activities, which I mentioned before. And when one develops sinful activities, one becomes averse to hearing these transcendental literatures of the Lord. So according to the 3 modes of nature, there are different relationships between the Lord and the living entities or the human beings. Those in the modes of ignorance and passion are averse to the existence of God, or else they formally accept the existence of the God as an order supplier. These are karmis. People accept that if I want this, the Lord should supply me this. Then I will believe in God. These are all fruity workers. Above them are those who are in the mode of goodness. This second class of men believe the supreme Brahman to be impersonal. They accept the cult of bhakti, in which hearing of Krishna Katha is the first item, as a means but not the end. So one who in the previous week we said that those in the mode of passion and ignorance, they don't believe in the existence of God, or God should be an order supplier. Then there may be some in the mode of goodness who believe in the supreme Brahman to be impersonal. They believe in impersonal Brahma Jyoti. That this Brahma Jyoti is the effulgence of the Lord. They accept the cult of bhakti, in which hearing is the first item. Yes, they also hear Krishna Katha, but it is not at the end. For them, Krishna Katha is not the end, but as a means to achieve this Brahma Jyoti. But then Srila Prabhupada mentions, above them are those who are pure devotees of the Lord. They are situated in the transcendent stage above the mode of material goodness. Such persons are decidedly convinced that the name, fame, qualities, etc., the personality of Godhead are non-different from one another on the absolute plane. So the third class, or not the third class, first is those in the mode of passionate ignorance who are, want to be karmis. Then the second class devotees, the next level are those who are jnanis, who speculate a lot, but above everyone are the pure devotees of the Lord, or who they are always situated beyond the mode of material goodness. They are transcendental, and they know that hearing the name, form, qualities, etc., they are all non-different from one another. Because they are all on the same absolute plane. For them, hearing the topics of Krishna is equal to seeing the Lord face to face. So, according to this class of men who are situated in pure devotion service, the highest goal of human life is Purushartha, or the highest goal of life for these pure devotees is devotion service to the Lord, which is a real mission of life. Then we go to the next verse, where Vidura is addressing Maitreya. O Maitreya, O friend of the distressed, the glories of the Supreme Lord can alone do good for people all over the world. Therefore, just as bees collect honey from flowers, kindly describe the essence of all topics, the topics of the Lord. Now, gradually, Vidura is coming by step to his conclusion. He says, O friend of the distressed, the glories of the Supreme Lord can alone do good for people of the whole, all over the world. Therefore, as bees collect honey from flowers, kindly describe the essence of all the topics of the Lord. So see how very intelligently Vidura started, and gradually is coming to mundane topics with a centering of some in the middle somewhere about Krishna Katha, and then gradually is coming to the essence of all topics, that is topics of the Lord. So this is how Vidura is drawing the attention of the common man, because conditioned souls have so many topics to discuss. So gradually, Vidura is bringing the non-believers, the impersonalists, everyone to the attention to the topics of the Lord. Then in text number 16, Vidura tells, kindly chant all those superhuman transcendental activities of the Supreme Controller, the personality of Godhead, who accepted incarnations fully equipped with all potency for the full manifestation and maintenance of the cosmic creation. So here Vidura is asking about the various incarnations in which the Lord is equipped with all full potency for manifestation as well as maintenance. So as I mentioned before, when creation takes place, the maintenance is also taken care of. So here it is mentioned that Vidura thought as to how Maitreya should gradually start discussing about Krishna Katha. So he is gradually starting from mundane this thing to spiritual path, and he started inquiring about the three Purusha avatars to know about the creation. I'll cut short a few things. Now, here, Srila Prabhupada gives an example in the Srimad Bhagavatam as to how when rainy season, when water comes from the sun, the rainwater is also generated from the sun. And in due course of time, the water is there in the river or ocean. During the summer season, the same water is again absorbed by the sun. Similarly, all the living entities, moving or inert, they are generated from the Lord, maintained by the Lord, and then enter into the Lord again back. And another example that's given is about a potter. He makes pots with the clay from the earth, and then the pots are used, and after use, they are thrown and the pots enter back into the earth. Similarly, all the living entities originate from the Lord, they are sustained by the Lord, and then they again enter back into the Lord. Next verse, text number 17. Then After hearing, Sukadeva Goswami now starts replying. Sukadeva Goswami said, the great sage Maitreya Rishi, after honoring Vidura very gently, began to speak at Vidura's request for the greatest welfare of all people. So Sukadeva Goswami now replied to this question by Parikshit Maharaj. He says, the great sage Maitreya Rishi, after honoring Vidura very gently, greatly began to speak at Vidura's request for the greatest welfare of all common people. So, in this verse, Maitreya Rishi is also described as Bhagavan because not because he's the Supreme Lord, but he surpassed the qualities of all ordinary human beings in terms of learning and his experience. Thus, his selection, what the world is considered for this particular mission, is considered authoritative. So, Maitreya Rishi was a great devotee of the Lord. So, the greatest welfare activity in this world is Krishna consciousness. And spreading Krishna consciousness is the foremost activity of all preachers. So Maitreya was one such personality, and he was also traveling for this particular mission. Then text number 18. See, Maitreya said, O Vidura, all glory unto you. You have inquired from me of the greatest of all goodness, and thus you have shown your mercy both to the world and to me, because your mind is always absorbed in thoughts of the transcendence. So all the while, Vidura put forth so many questions, and now from this verse onwards, Maitreya Rishi starts replying to Vidura, and he says, O Vidura, all glory unto you. You have inquired from me of the greatest of all goodness. There is nothing beyond this, but the greatest of goodness that he says, that is the essence. And by putting forth these inquiries, Maitreya Rishi says, you have shown your mercy both to the world and to me, because your mind is always absorbed in thoughts of transcendence. So on the contrary, Maitreya Rishi is appreciating Vidura for having given mercy to Maitreya Rishi himself, because Vidura is always occupied in transcendence. So Vidura is occupied in transcendence, and Maitreya Rishi appreciates Vidura's putting forth questions on transcendental subject matters. So Vidura is asking questions on Krishna Katha, and Maitreya Rishi is appreciating his desire to hear about Krishna Katha. So this is the most important aspect. When two devotees meet, they don't discuss anything other than Krishna Katha. So Maitreya Rishi actually glorifies Vidura, because Vidura also is always situated in transcendence. And is appreciating Vidura because Vidura has cleared the path for Maitreya Rishi to discuss on topics of Krishna. Then text number 19. He says, Maitreya says, Oh Vidura, it is not at all wonderful that you have so accepted the Lord without deviation of thought, for you are born from the semen of Vyasadeva. So he's now Maitreya Rishi, he's glorifying Vidura, saying that he has accepted the Lord without deviation of thought. Vidura was a perfectly personal devotee of the Lord, pure devotee of the Lord. And why? Because he was born from the semen of Vyasadeva. So some important points are there, that according to one's status of work, a living entity is placed in a particular father's semen. And because Vidura was not an ordinary living entity, he was given a chance to be born from the semen of Vyasadeva. So Vidura, though he was born of a Shudra woman, but father was Vyasadeva, who was an empowered incarnation himself. So based on one's work, status of work, one is placed in a particular body. So birth of a living entity is a great science. That is why this Garbhadana Samskara is designed for generating good population. After that, it is said it is not only the Garbhadana Samskara that is important. At the same time, a proper training is required devotionally to maintain purity. So generally, Srila Prabhupada mentions in the purport as to how government tries to bring forth so many controls or so many measures to control population, but none of them are working enough. But automatically, if you see that when all these Vedic principles are followed, like Garbhadana Sanskara, proper training, then automatically good progeny is developed in this material world also, in the form of pure devotees of the Lord. So it is not only important to have the right children, but also to grow them in the right perspective. Then the next text number, I'll rush through a little bit because of lack of time. Text number 20, Maitreya is telling, I knew that you are now Vidura due to the cursing of Mandavya Muni, and that formerly you are King Yamaraja, the great controller of living entities after their death. You were begotten by the son of Satyavati, Vyasadeva, in the kept wife of his brother. So Maitreya is disclosing who is Vidura. Vidura was in his previous birth was Yamaraja. So he's addressing Vidura in his previous birth. He was Yamaraja, who was also a great devotee of the Lord. As Yamaraja, his responsibility was to punish the conditioned living entities for their sinful activities. So Vidura, Yamaraja had a very great responsibility. And this responsibility was given to him because he was a confidential devotee of the Lord. So I'm not going into this pastime background of Yamaraja becoming Vidura because we already heard about it. But on the other hand, there are examples of like King Vena, who was a very cruel ruler. Why? Because he was born from his mother of Prithyu and King Anga's father. So because he was born of an evil mother, he also became cruel. In text 21, Maitreya Rishi is addressing, your good self is one of the eternal associates of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, for whose sake the Lord, while going back to his abode, left instructions with me. So now Maitreya is actually glorifying the Lord as to how Vidura was one of the eternal associates of the Lord as Yamaraj. And because of this being an eternal associate of the Lord left back instructions for Vidura to Maitreya Rishi. So Lord gave instructions to Uddhava, asking Vidura to meet Maitreya, and Lord also gave in Srimad Bhagavatam to Maitreya to be given to Vidura. So Vidura got this great opportunity due to his greatness because he is also one of the Mahajanas. And skip some of the things because we have 2-3 more slokas to go. Text 22. Maitreya says, I shall therefore describe to you the pastimes by which the personality of Godhead extends his transcendental potency for the creation, maintenance, and dissolution of the cosmic world as they occur one after the other. So being placed by the questions of Vidura, Maitreya Rishi now says that he's going to describe the pastimes by which the personality of Godhead maintains the creation, also maintains it, and also dissolution that occurs one after the other. So the entire creation, manifestation, and annihilation is undertaken by the potency of the Lord. Text number 23. The personality of Godhead, the master of all living entities, existed prior to the creation as one without a second. It is by his will only that creation is made possible, and again everything merges in him. This supreme self is symptomized by different names. So here, Maitreya Rishi now is explaining that this supreme personality of Godhead is the only one who existed even before the creation. And at the time of annihilation, everything merges in him. So for this purpose, the Lord accepts various incarnations, and he is also known by his different names. So there is a proper timing for this creation. There is a proper timing for annihilation also. So this is in detail explained the second canto of Srimad Bhagavatam. And also this refers to the Chatusloki of Srimad Bhagavatam, second canto, 9th chapter. I will skip this part of it because we already covered these chapters. Now I have 2 more slokas to go, which I'll try to touch. Then Maitreya says, the Lord, the undisputed proprietor of everything, was the only seer. The cosmic manifestation was not present at that time, and thus he felt imperfect without his plenary and separated part and parcels. The material energy was dormant, whereas the internal potency was manifested. So as I mentioned before, even before the creation of the Lord existed, and the cosmic manifestation was not there. But at that time, the Lord felt imperfect without his separated part and parcels. That means the Lord is perfect, but somewhere he was feeling that incompleteness because the separated part and parcels, like us were not present. This material energy, that means we were all dormant within the body of the Lord, whereas only the internal potency was manifested. So the example is given that the Lord is the supreme proprietor. So somewhat he felt that some imperfection was there without the material compassion. Why? The Lord does not feel imperfection because of us, but out of compassion for living entities who were dormant in his body out of forgetfulness, Lord felt that separation. Example is given that uh, uh, the Lord is awake, but his wives, if they are sleeping, then the Lord feels that he should wake them up. So similarly, we are all meant to be serving the Lord. We are in that sleeping state, and out of the compassion for us, the Lord wants to awaken us, by which he also enjoys. Lord is Sachidananda Vigraha, and being part and parcel, we are also Sachidananda Vigraha, and we are meant to be a part of the enjoyment of the Lord by being a part of his pastimes. And the pastimes are his leelas. I'll have one more sloka before I conclude. I'm sorry, I'm running out of time. Then Maitreyi, she says, the Lord is the seer, and the external energy which is seen works as both cause and effect in this cosmic manifestation. O great fortunate Vidura, this external energy is known as Maya or illusion, and through her agency only is the entire material manifestation made possible. So the Lord is the seer, the Lord is seeing everything, and this external energy, which is known as Maya, it was, is also an energy which of the Supreme Lord. As the Lord says, Devi Yesha Gunamayi Mama Maya Dvaratya, the Lord says in Bhagavad Gita. And through this, the entire manifestation is made possible. So through the energy of Maya, the illusory energy, the entire material manifestation is made possible by the Lord. And the Lord says that one who surrenders unto him, one can become free from this illusory energy known as Maya. So, one second. The Lord as Mahavishnu impregnates this pradhana or material nature with living entities by their karma and swabhava through the influence of time. So the Lord as one of the Purusha avatars, that is as Mahavishnu, impregnates the pradhana or material nature with living entities like us by their karma and swabhava, by our duty, by our karma and our nature through the influence of time. So this, I conclude my class for the day. I'm sorry I've extended by a few minutes. If there is time, I can take one or two questions.
Hare Krishna, Prabhuji. Yes, Prabhuji, we have time.
Okay. Any questions anybody has got? I thought it was up to 8 o'clock, so I had to rush through. But still, I can take some questions. Any comments?
Hare Krishna, Prabhuji. Very enlightening class. Thank you so much. Very grateful to you for this class. Yes, any questions, Hare Krishna?
Thank you very much, Prabhu, for giving me an opportunity to speak.
All glories to Srila Prabhupada. Thank you. Okay, there's one question here, Prabhu. What happened to Vidura's wife? Kalyani Mataji is asking.
All those who appeared with the Lord went back to their spiritual abode. I don't know the much in final details, but all of them, most of them appeared as the Lord's associates, and they were all Lord's associates. They appeared to perform pastimes of the Lord, but I've not heard about any mention of them. But either most of them went back to the spiritual abode, or some of them took part as demigods. There's a quote somewhere in Srimad Bhagavatam only. I'm not able to get that exact reference, but many went back to the spiritual abode after the Lord wound up his pastimes, and some were placed in the position of demigods. Like if you see, even Yamaraj was a great associate of the Lord, but he came here to assist the Lord in his mission. About his wife, I didn't see a reference anywhere. But one thing is that associates of the Vidura being a great devotee of the Lord, apparently his wife also would have had that benefit of that association. Destination, I don't know, Prabhu.
Thank you, Prabhuji.
Thank you, Prabhu. Anybody else?
So you make yourself a devotee, Hasbina. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna Mataji.
Hare Krishna, kindly unmute yourself, Mataji. Sorry.
Hare Krishna.
Yes.
Hare Krishna, Prabhuji. Dandavat pranam.
Hare Krishna Mataji. Hare Krishna Mataji. Hare Krishna.
I'm telling my husband, you also become a good devotee, so I get all the benefits of going back to God, that I
Please
don't have
pray.
to do anything.
Please pray
Hare
for me, Mataji.
Please
pray
pray.
for me.
Hare Krishna, Prabhuji. God bless you.
Thank you very much, Mataji.
Hare-
Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
Hare Krishna Prabhuji. Dandavat pranam Prabhuji.
Hare Krishna Mataji. Hare Krishna Mataji. Hare Krishna.
Dandavat pranam Prabhuji.
Thank you.
It was very
Thank
nice
you
to
all
hear.
very much. Thank you all very much. Granth Raj Srimad Bhagavatam ki jai. Srila Prabhupada ki jai.